Greetings, my name is Keith Doster, and I'm the Director of Grace Deaf Missions and Evangelistic Outreach to the Deaf of Mexico. One of the most difficult things about working with deaf people is explaining deafness to hearing people. I don't pretend to fully understand all the trials and struggles that deaf people experience. I'm sure that's impossible for us as hearing people to understand. But I want to help you understand to some degree and help you imagine what deafness is like. And I want to speak to you of the plight of many deaf people in Mexico. Unlike here in the United States, which provides many services to accommodate the needs of deaf people, Mexico is largely oblivious to the deaf. There are very few schools, very few interpreters, and almost no biblical influence among the deaf. We have also discovered there are many deaf people in Mexico who do not know sign language. Imagine that for just a moment. There are probably thousands of deaf men, women, and children throughout Mexico who cannot hear, cannot speak, cannot read or write, and who cannot even communicate through sign language because no one's ever taught them. Now imagine this. You are responsible to communicate the gospel to one of these deaf people. A person in this condition doesn't even know their own name. Now you are tasked with explaining the gospel message. You're reduced to using hand gestures, facial expressions, and drawing pictures. Where do you start? How do you do this? How does one explain sin and guilt, or the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, or the forgiveness of sin to someone who possesses no means of communication? We believe the deaf community, and particularly those deaf people who live in less developed countries, and more particularly those deaf people who do not know sign language, are further removed from the gospel than any other people group in the world. It's understood by most missions experts that the deaf are the fourth largest unreached people group in the world, and they live all over the world. The Lord has raised up Grace Deaf Missions to begin addressing this huge task of taking the gospel to the deaf in Mexico. Since 2011, my wife Sharon and I, along with a number of deaf pastors from the U.S., have been working in the city of León. We have conducted numerous conferences designed to teach basic biblical doctrine and the gospel of salvation in Jesus Christ alone. We have seen a deaf school begun for children. We have seen hearing people, many hearing people, signing up for Mexican Sign Language classes. And yes, Mexican Sign Language is very different from American Sign Language. Recently, we made our first visit to Mexico City, where it is reported that 80% of all the deaf of Mexico live. Thanks in large part to the efforts of our Assistant Director, Omar Vasquez, a church there has begun an outreach program for the deaf, and almost 90 people have volunteered to learn Mexican Sign Language. We've also had discussions with one of the largest evangelical denominations in the country, consisting of 6,000 churches. They have expressed a desire to have us work with them to reach the deaf throughout Mexico City and in the more rural southern regions of Mexico. We've seen God's blessing on our efforts to take the message of salvation to people who cannot hear it, but who can see it with their eyes and understand it with their hearts. But much more remains to be done. And so we invite you to join us and help us in this important work. The Apostle Paul says in Romans 10, "How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? But how are the deaf to hear the gospel even if there is a preacher? They can't hear." They need to see the gospel. They need someone to explain the good news in a way they can understand it, through pictures, through facial expressions, and through sign language. So join with us in this good work and pray with us that the Lord would answer our prayer from Psalm 90:17. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands.